or a question that that gets asked a lot is can you recall when you first met Marc?
First met or first saw?
Both.
Because I used to see him around all the time before I met him, in restaurants, at sort of gigs. I was obviously working photographer long before I started photographing Marc. And I was never overly interested. I mean, he was interesting visually, but I wasn't a huge fan of music. I liked it, but I wasn't, you know, I was into other sorts of music at the time. And then he drifted into electric music, and I'd stayed very much with sort of underground bands and stuff like that. So when I was actually asked to photograph him, all I'd heard was the press stuff about, you know, teeny bopper band, Marc Bolan sells out, blah, blah, blah. And I wasn't actually that interested until a friend of mine, who was a guy called Bill, who used to do the light system at the Roundhouse, basically said, you should be, because this guy's great visually. You know, the gigs were a real hoot, because he used to do the lights for Marc as well. And so he kind of talked me into sort of agreeing to photograph him. And when Marc came round, because I wanted to start with the studio session, which is actually here, this table is still there as well, how about that? And we sat, and to sort of break the ice, we got stuck into this strange liqueur I got from Ibiza when I'd been out there, called Herbitas, which was kind of like dynamite, right? And we just got completely trashed, him, me and Mickey, sitting there, you know, sort of chatting away. And that was the first time I actually spoke to him and actually met him properly. And then we went on and did these rather bizarre photographs, which you've probably seen on a grey background in black and white, and we're sort of leaping around like this. And
yeah.
it was because they're out of their heads, like dramatically. That was the first time I met Marc.
Right.
And we got on very well. So they liked those pictures. I'm never quite sure how I felt about them. They were very drunken. I think they were quite fun to do, and they quite enjoyed the evening. And often as a photographer, you're hired not simply because of what you are as a photographer, but more because the people quite enjoy spending some time with you. So it's a kind of a package deal, right? You know, because you do have to hang out a bit. And so they asked me to do the gig, and then, you know, I fell for the whole legend thing, because the gigs were just insane. I did the Boston gig. That's the first time I saw T.Rex live. Was the legendary, you know, the glider drone.
Yeah.
120 odd people threw themselves off balconies in ecstasy.
Friends magazine was there.
Yeah,
You don't remember Steve Took being there?
No, it was in Boston. I went on the T.Rex to see Coach with various other people. I didn't go out with Marc or anything.
Yeah.
And I went there, and I walked out on the stage like a few minutes before they came on to find a vantage point to snap away. And saw this sea of faces like a Nuremberg rally holding up these pictures of Marc, and which completely blew me away. And did my bit at the gig. And then we're back on the coach. I went in the dressing room for a bit. I don't remember Tookie being in the dressing room. If he was, it was quite low key. And
right.
Those were the confrontational days. So if he had been there, I'm sure it would have been memorable.
Yeah.
Does seem to have been to the people who were there.
Yeah, his girlfriend Lou remembered.
I'm not saying he wasn't there. I'm saying he wasn't there when I was there.
Yeah.
I didn't stay long. I mean, I didn't hang out. I've never liked dressing rooms.
Mick Gray remembers it as well.
Yeah, Mickey Gray remembers what he wants to remember.
Yes, it's slightly different.
And you can quote me on that. Mickey Gray, the authority on T.Rex, yeah, right. Mickey O'Halloran's all right.
And of course you filmed. You were the photographer for the Wembley gig that was used for Born to Boogie.
Yeah, I did quite a lot of gigs, a lot in America as well. I'm quite good at live gigs because of, you know, coming up through the underground press and club situation. I can live with low light levels, and when you're getting kicked about, you know, I'm good in riots. And so, you know, I always came back with something, so I got kind of known for doing live gigs. So Rex asked me to do a lot, because they were pretty tough gigs. I mean, you know, the crowds were frenzied. I remember Ringo saying after the Wembley gig, it was like being in the Beatles in the early days. You know, there's that sort of hysteria. You got the teeth of the hydrophone. You do see your mind. Get it on, back on, get it on. Yeah, I did quite a lot of gigs.
Where's Keith?
I remember when you used to go. Tom and Jerry were a groove last night.
Oh, Bob, have you gone into this?
Rock and roll. Who's who in rock and roll? Tell me that.
At one point said, look, let's do some shots with the tiger because we might find a use for it later, and it's such a great tiger, and we got it and we've paid to hire it, so let's use it. We did the shots which he later used on the Hits album. I mean, I've only worked with 2 people off the top of my head that could just ad-lib a photo session without any notice. So you could bang out an album sleeve in 5 to 10 minutes, where often there's a lot of long work done.
For your love, she's my woman of gold. She's not very old. She's my woman of gold. She's not very old. I don't mean to be bold, but may I hold your hand? She ain't no witch, and I love the way she twitch, She ain't no witch, and I love the way she twitch, I'm a 2-penny prince, and I give her hard love. Take it out on me, mama. Sweet, clad in black, don't look back, I love you. Dirty and sweet, oh yeah. When you're weak, you got the teeth of the never seen the wind before. It's like a ball of love. Have you ever kissed a car before? Like a dove. And when I'm sad, I slide. Oh, slide. Baby, I was born to boogie. Baby, I was born to boogie. Spend some time with you. I wanna do what I wanna do. Baby, I was born a motivation. Baby, I was born a motivation. Spend some time with you. I wanna do what I wanna do. Look at you now, look at you now, look at you now, look at you now. Baby, I was born to boogie. Baby, I was born to boogie. Spend some time with you. I wanna do what I wanna do. Look at you now, look at you now, look at you now, look at you now. Baby, I was born to boogie. Baby, I was born to boogie. Spend some time with you. I wanna do what I wanna do. Baby, I was born a motivation. Baby, I was born a motivation. Spend some time with you. I wanna do what I wanna do. Look at you now, look at you now, look at you now, look at you now. Baby, I was born to boogie. Baby, I was born to boogie. Spend some time with you. I wanna do what I wanna do. Look at you now, 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 look at you
His then wife, they had an old beautiful Rolls, and when it was over they took me to Hammersmith. We were pulled up at the traffic lights, but his hair out here was very recognisable, and the next car was going, you know, he's there, and he said, "Yes, love, it's me, and that's Cat Weasel, same car."
His determination at that time was fantastic and was really highlighted when June Child came into his life.
June was very strong. He could still play that guise of that mystical hippie, whereas June behind the scenes was making sure things were right for him.
Right, and you were saying earlier that when Marc was with June, you saw them socially as well?
Yeah, I mean, because he lived on the other side of the canal, I mean, literally, if the canal wasn't in the way, it's probably 100 metres away, and they had a flat there they'd had forever. It was a first floor flat above a basement, where another friend might have just so happened to live. Strangely enough, Marc was the godfather to her kid, Nigeria, so there was kind of and I knew Linda anyway. It's got called Linda March. So there was kind of a social thing. But what, you know, if Marc wanted to do something and June, you know, didn't particularly want to join him or whatever, then I used to get run up as someone to be with, not a minder, because as you can see I'm hardly built to be a minder, but more just someone to be with socially rather than going somewhere on your own, which is a bit sad. You know, hence the reason I went to the Zandra Rhodes fashion show, which I hated, and things like that. So yeah, I hang around a lot with Marc on that level. But you know, I socialised with Steve Curry, because I got really well with Steve. I mean, my then wife and Steve and his wife and I used to sort of eat together regularly and socialise with. Mickey I socialised with. The only one that I didn't really socialise with was Bill. Not for any reason other than I think he still lived in Southend or somewhere dreadful. And not that Southend dreadful, but I mean dreadful as in terms of the geography would defeat a friendship. So he was never around in the off moments, and I used to socialise with him on tours, but not you know, outside of tours.
Marc didn't tend to dress the other members up of the band, unlike, say, Bowie with Ziggy Stardust, where he had Woody Woodley.
Yeah, different band, different concept. All I would say is that you know, you put it down to a Marc Bolan concept, because no one invented Marc Bolan other than Marc Bolan. This is not a Spice Girls thing where you like get a bunch of people and tell them what to do. Marc invented himself at a very early age, and he was a totally unique person. You know, I mean, a lot of people don't quite give him credit for that sort of thing.
I can't walk down the street anymore, right? So I employ people around me to make sure that no one really doesn't. I had to move because I couldn't stay at home for hundreds of kids outside.
Well, they were breaking the place up, were they?
Well, they didn't mean they just write all over the wall. It's a hang up for the neighbours.
You couldn't even go to the corner shop if you'd run out of salt. You couldn't actually think, oh, I'll pop up the shop. And so you had to phone, and somebody went and got you salt and brought it into the house. And all those basic things, and like your cleaner that used to be your cleaner that you'd had from the year dot, would suddenly come with her daughter and her daughter's friend, and they'd all come and want autographs, and so she wouldn't be doing the hoovering, she'd be sort of sorting out all the bits for the kids and things like that.
The last year for me has been very weird because I did what those people did, and I now do what I do now. I'd never believed in security, and I still don't. I feel I do what I do to people that want to listen. If they don't want to listen, crap them. I don't care, right? I do it because I believe in it, and I'm giving everything I can. And you get to a point, it's very proud, and you do it, and if people boo at you, I mean, I'm really rascal, and it's like, you do it, and that's what I do it for. What I get back is incidental.
He loved it. I mean, he thrived on it. It was a culmination of what he'd spent all those years trying to do. And initially, it was very exciting. He loved all those screaming fans. Later, it got very difficult because he suddenly realised that they weren't listening to his music, to the things that he'd written, because he's basically a poet. That's where he was. He wrote words, very beautiful words, that he put to music. He didn't write music and then put words to them. So he then, after, I don't know, 2.5 years of screamers, and they still were all screaming, he used to come home and say, but they didn't really hear the song. And they'd all whack up the volume, and you get Steve on bass, and it would be up at number 10, and Mark's guitar, it didn't have 12 on the knob, but had it, it would have been up at 12, and the drums were turned up, and so they just played louder and louder to overcome the audience reaction.
I mean, what he said to me once, actually, which I thought was quite funny, was that some reviewer sort of made some comment about his ability with the guitar, right, as in, you know, there were better guitar players around, and he basically made the point that when he was a kid growing up, he was more interested in getting his moves right in the mirror than he wasn't actually learning the guitar. It kind of says it all in his ways. But Marc was a very self-aware person, in the sense that he always knew what shape he made, what feeling he gave you. If he looked at you, he knew what expression was on his face. Not a lot of people can do that, and other than models and actresses. So there was that aspect of Marc. But get back to your question, you know, why he didn't dress the band up. I'd imagine it's large because he wanted to stand out and be different. Although, in a sense, you know, Mickey didn't dress like Marc, but he was also visually memorable. So it's not as obvious as the old idea of the glamorous singer with the backing band all in suits sitting down. It's not as obvious as that, but I think there's an element of that in it.
I've taken many pictures of my father.
Yeah.
What was your favorite shot that you took of him?
I've got a lot of favourites, but there's this one which is actually the back of him, and he's walking out of an airport with his top hat on and his granny's fur coat and a bag, and he's just walking out in this alien atmosphere, this one small elf-like person, and it could only be Marc.
You actually said something born out of time about that picture.
Yeah, but that was after the event. You know, but at the time you just react to an image, and then you rationalise the image. You don't. Do you know what I mean? And do you take pictures? Do you take pictures?
I've never done much taking. I've done a lot of the other side of it. A lot of it with V actually.
What you tend to do as a photographer is to react to an image, and then afterwards you can understand why or what it was that turned you on in the first place. But you don't sit there rationalising because you're thinking 125th of a second.
Yeah.
So you go, yeah, great, click, and then afterwards you think, you know, about why it made you do it.
Yeah.
So am I making that clear?
The sort of spookiest picture it affected me actually was when we were doing Born to Boogie. And we're in the warehouse, and you've got to remember we were quite chummy, so there were times and breaks of shooting we'd just like hang out and whatever. And we're looking at the car that was used in the film, which is a really nice car. And Marc said, I'll tell you what, you know, take a picture of me behind the wheel of a car, because I've always had this premonition that I would die in a car crash.
Yeah.
So he got behind the wheel of the car, and as I pressed the button, he just threw his head back and made this sort of very maniacal laugh, and I've got this picture to this day, which is like really, really weird when you look at it and know what actually happened.
I think Marc set out to become famous.
Yeah.
You know, if a bit of antagonism went on along the way, then fair enough. But I don't think he was ever that provocative. The thing about the selling out to his, you know, to the flower children bit. Yeah, I mean, genuinely, you know, you've got to go back to when him and Junie lived on Yoga in a little flat off Wimbledon Common or wherever it was. I didn't know, but I think it was Wimbledon, somewhere like that. Was that nobody had any money. So he was acoustic because he couldn't afford amps and vans he needed to, you know, that's why he was acoustic. I think you can say the same about Tookie as well, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, they were at heart rock musicians. Remember John's Children. Remember all the early influences, you know.
I'm not really thinking in terms of the changeover from acoustic to electric.
No, I'm not. I'm not saying. What I'm saying is that the accusation of selling out was when they became electric. I mean, they've all had it. Dylan had it. Tim Hardin had it. Everyone that goes from acoustic to electric is always accused by Luddites of selling out, and that was the sort of vibe that was coming off the music player.
A bit after he'd gone electric, when it actually became pop and stopped being in any way, shape or form hippie music.
Well, that
really with Hot Love at that point.
Well, you mean what you're saying is that they were all right about White Swan?
Living in Marble Arch then, in one of those high-rise security prisons, and it had a spare bedroom which we'd egg-boxed and done all that stuff to. And we were sitting in the sitting room, and he suddenly got this, he used to get this weird look in his eyes, this sort of third-dimensional sort of space look. And he suddenly jumped up and he whisked off. He said, I've got to go. And off he went, and with all this plinking and plonking and I had the television on, and I was reading and doing a crossword and all things at the same time. And so he said, come and listen to this. And I whizzed out, went into the room, and it was, and there it was, Ride a White Swan. And it was when he said, and then the first thing he always asked, I don't know if he asked anybody else this, is, does it sound like anything else? Does it sound like anything you've ever heard before? And then I'd listen and I'd say, well, a bit like whatever, a bit of Howling Wolf in there, or a bit of Bob Dylan, or, no, I haven't. And then you go away, and you say, well, go out. You go out and you hear both, it used to do it on T.Rex, had two linked T.Rex, and you'd go out and you hear the tapes whizzing back. And then he'd drop it down a track, because he'd go on to the next track, and then you'd hear, and it suddenly would alter subtly and change. And then you get called back, and you're summoned, and you go, sit on the floor, no chairs, on the floor, hit the knob, and then he'd play, and then you'd listen. And he'd say, what do you think? And I said, it's great, wonderful. I'm sure it'll be a hit. Doesn't sound like anybody else? no, it doesn't sound like anybody else. And that was it. And it was done. And then he used to ring Tony Visconti, whatever time, day or night, didn't matter, could be 4 in the morning when he'd done that. And then it was, Tone, I've just written the next single. And then, can I come over? And often we'd go over at 4 in the morning with his TAP tape. And Tony would be up, would play it, and he'd offer suggestions which Marc took no notice of. Then Marc would go away, and suddenly when they got to the studio, some of Tony's suggestions were in there, but they weren't Tony's, they were Marc's. All Marc's.
They called a bit with the whole idea.
Yeah, when he, well, I think Charles Shaar Murray put it extremely well in the Dandy and the Underworld interview. He said it wasn't very controversial really when Marc went electric. It's when he decided he wasn't going to bother with hippie values anymore.
He never really had hippie values.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a marriage of convenience, hippiedom for Marc. It was, you know, that Marc wanted to be famous and he took a route that made him famous. He was very blessed in meeting June that complimented him. You know, and he had good support from the likes of Mickey and you know, earlier obviously Tookie. But I don't buy this thing. I mean, you're talking to the wrong guy really, because I started with quite a jaundiced attitude to Marc. As I got to know him, I got to really like the guy. I thought he was unique. I thought it was a one-off. I thought it was special.
There are very few people in life that can decide that they want to be famous and actually make it happen. And Marc did that. I mean, to be an innovator anyway is a wonderful feeling. And to have glitter on your face when nobody in the whole world had ever done it. Nobody. We lived in Little Venice in Clarendon Gardens, and we had the 2 top floors of a nice Georgian house. And we realised he was famous when we spent the whole of our summer on our knees crawling across the drawing room, because God forbid we should stand up. The whole street was full of children. He was 24 hours a day music. He wanted the world. And the only sadness in his life was that he never got America in the way it happened in England, Europe and Japan. When all I do is play this baseball ricochet. Baseball Ricochet is a wonderful story, and it came as a title. It didn't come as a song initially. A little boy, when we lived in Clarendon Gardens, we lived on the upstairs of the house. We had the 2 floors. In the basement of the next house was a housing trust, and a little boy lived there with his mum. And it's a one-parent family, which there weren't that many of in those days. And his father was black and his mother was white, so he was this most beautiful child, golden brown, but with white blonde hair, curly hair. And he really got on well with Marc, because Marc had curly hair, and so they were like sort of positive and negatives. Wonderful. And he was called Anton. And one day he came in, and his mum had obviously gone up and got her dole money and her gyros and things, and she went to Woolworths and bought him a pair of baseball boots. Nowadays they're called Converse, and children spend £45 on a pair. These were 19 and 11 in old proper money, in real terms. And he was so proud of them. And he had little, like, tatty old shorts on and a t-shirt and these gleaming baseball boots. And he came and bashed on the door, and Marc! And Marc, I went down and let him in, and he whizzed up the stairs, haired up the stairs, he leapt up the stairs. And he said, "Look what I've got, Marc, look what my mum just got me. I've got baseball boots." And he proceeded to run across the drawing room, up the wall, like 2 or 3 steps, and he ricocheted off that wall, whizzed up to the other side and ricocheted off the back. And he said, and he was just whizzing backwards and forwards, and Marc went, "Oh, Baseball Ricochet," and he wrote the title down. And then Anton, they had a cup of tea and, you know, played records and hung out, and then Anton went home for his tea. And then Marc was gone, and he was upstairs, and that's how it came about. And lots of people think it's autobiographical, and it is, but it started off from Anton, who was a little boy with his new baseball boots.
I didn't, before I photographed and got to him, I didn't think that. So, you know, I'm coming from a different angle.
Yeah.
You know, totally different angle.
And you were saying about June that she was a crucial part.
They were a good team.
Yeah.
They really were a good. I'm not sure how much love had to do with it, to paraphrase the song, but I think they possibly loved each other a bit. But it was very much a team thing, a bit almost a businessy. That sounds a bit hard-nosed, but there was a businessy element to it. But she certainly freed his mind of a lot of things. I mean, she came from a bit of business background, music biz background, and so he could concentrate on what he did best.
Yeah.
So she was very much.
So she complimented him then.
Jim was all right. I mean, the other thing that I find quite weird is the fact that when everyone talks about that stupid documentary, it's all about how Marc left June. I would hear a few things about Junie, which was, you know, wasn't entirely without its mutuality.
Yeah.
And that's not personal. That's, you know, I mean, because I was around at the same time. You know, it wasn't all Marc meeting the singer and leaving the grieving wife bit. I mean, that's all music business bollocks, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or newspaper.
We never stopped loving each other. The fact that we couldn't live together, or that I wasn't prepared to play second best to anybody, because I really feel I'm worth more than that, as he feels he's worth more than that. Even now, I still speak of him in the present tense, because it's very strange. I don't even think of him as dead, really. But we were still in love, and the fact we couldn't get on and we couldn't live under the same roof was just something that happened. And we used to go to these horrendous divorce meetings. I mean, they were nightmares. And because Marc was worth a lot of money, there were things like settlements and property settlements and alimony monies, and even though there weren't children involved or anything, or animals, nobody was fighting over the cat and the dog and all that sort of stuff. And it was how much a month you're going to get and which credit cards you can... I mean, it was absolutely awful, very painful. And we used to go to these meetings set up usually by Tony Howard, and i.e. on Marc's camp with all his team, which was no longer my team because I'd left the pitch. And I'd go and arrive with my sister Anthony Rubinstein, and the two of us would sit there, and Anthony would open his briefcase around this huge conference table. Anthony would open his briefcase and take out a packet of digestive biscuits, not even chocolate ones, and it was totally disarming. He'd give one to everybody, to all these solicitors, everybody, all the way around the table, and then we'd sit, and they'd all munch away at their biscuits, and Anthony would close his briefcase, and then the proceedings would start. And Marc would sit one side and I'd be the other, surrounded by all these minions, and we'd look, and we'd gradually look at each other. And at one meeting in Manchester Square, we were just, it was so devastating. It was nothing about us. It was like all these people were carving us up, taking all the years we'd spent together and like pulling them out, like pieces of a spider's web. And they were all sitting around rather like spiders, and they all had like bits of your soul, and they were all pulling on them and pinging them. And we took one look at each other, and Marc stood up and said, "I'm going to the loo," and I said, "I'll come with you." And we both left the room together. So everybody, as I turned to close the door behind us, there was all this sort of like blank looks, like they've both gone out of the room together. I think they thought we were going to kill each other outside, so get it over and done with. And instead we went to the lab, and not for a wee, and to get away. And Marc put the lid down and sat on it, and I sat on his knee, and we just put our arms around each other, and heads on shoulders, and just tears, not sobbing, just tears, and held really tightly, because all that was going on was absolutely nothing to do with us. And yet there we were being carved up, and we could have stopped it, but we didn't know how, and we were all being advised to do this, that, and the other. And so it went on, and it went on for a long time. So I went away and lived in Mexico for 2.5 years. And so we had the decree nisi, which I went to court for, which was so horrendous. I hated it. It's horrid. But you have to apply for an absolute. Either Marc or I has to apply. And none of us would. And we never did. So we were always married, even though we couldn't be together.
It was 7:30 in the morning, and as I turned on the wireless, the telephone rang, and Ronnie Money said, "June," and I went, "I've just heard. I'll talk to you later," and I put the phone down. I'll never marry again, ever.
She finished up on the hates list on that T-shirt that Malcolm McLaren did in about '74. There's a T-shirt which quite a lot of early punks used to wear, which had you're going to wake up one day and realise what side of the bed you've been lying on. And it had a list of loves and hates on it. It didn't have Marc on the hates list. It had Brian Ferry on there, which was a bit inconvenient because loads of early punks were Roxy Music fans. But it had quite a few people from June's circle on the hates list. June herself, listed as quote unquote June Bolan. It had Shalita Secunda was in there, and it had Mickey Finn's mate Nigel Weymouth on there. Nigel or Nicky Weymouth. It had both of them in fact on there.
Well, I mean, I don't know where Michael McLaren's come from. He's a bit of a prick anyway, isn't he, really?
This is being edited out because it's gone off subject, really, hasn't it?
Yes. I mean,
you know, I have yet to meet any artist that worked with Malcolm McLaren that didn't end up loathing him and getting ripped off by him. I've yet to meet anyone at all, bar none, including all the Pistols, John Lydon, the lot. You know, I would totally agree that he has a great entrepreneurial flair, and he's got a lot of in his mind about image and stuff with the Dolls and Pistols, obviously. But he's basically a liar and a crook. You don't have to edit that out. I mean, it's not relevant, so you will. But I mean,
we will. Because it's
I don't know what they left Mickey. I know about Marc. So I remember going around there on his birthday and planting these acres of strawberries and stuff. And when they go, it's my birthday. My fans are all right. But when Turkey used to go around and nick them.
Yeah.
Do you really want to put that down? I mean, basically, it's just quite funny that because there's an impish side to Steve Turk, and I don't know if he'd done with any malice, but he must have kind of known about the event, as it were, and he used to go around and finch the strawberries. Apparently, I never saw him do it. I was told. I can't remember now where the information came from. It was probably either Tony Secunda or Marc or June. So.
Yeah, last time I saw you, you said it was Marc that told you
because
it amused him.
Oh yeah, Marc didn't give a stuff. You know. Oh yeah, no, Marc wasn't malicious. Marc liked Turkey, you know. He just found him impossible to work with because Steve got too out of him, became too unreliable. Yeah,
did you ever actually discuss with Marc when the whole thing with Took and Secunda was going on? Did you ever?
No, because it was kind of, I was in a really impossible position because I mean I met Marc through Tony Secunda. He was the manager that arranged me to do that session I told you about.
I needed him, but I needed him for about 6 months. I needed him to do a Warner's Brother deal for me that I didn't have the clout to do. And that's what I did, and everybody in the world said, oh, June, don't do it. You'll never get free of him. Don't touch him with a barge pole. And I said, I want him. I need him. Marc and I need him. I need him for Marc. And I got him, because Tony thought he was in there, both feet, for life. But he wasn't.
So, but I mean, I've known Tony for ages, and I know what Tony's all about, so I didn't have any great loyalties, but I was in a difficult position with because the only reason Tony got involved with Steve was to piss off Marc. You know, I mean, Tony wasn't a fool. He knew he was basically hiring a bunch of trouble, and also because he felt that with a few legal strings being pulled, he could get a few quid out of it, right? And give some to Steve, but mainly it was to give some to Tony, like his percentage.
Yeah.
So he got involved on that level, and at the same time, obviously, I never fell out with Marc. I had a dialogue with Marc, so it's a bit of a different one to be in the middle of all that.
Right.
So you never really discussed the subject much?
No, I didn't. I mean, the only conversations I had with Marc was in the wee small hours when, took his contribution to the group would come up, and Marc would give him due credit for all those wonderful harmonies and what he actually, the dimension he gave it. Because I don't know if you ever sat down and compared, Tyrannosaurus Rex, Steve Took, and Tyrannosaurus Rex, Mickey Finn. I mean, much as Mickey, I mean, really, they lost a lot when he lost Steve, didn't they?
Yeah.
I have, but then you said that wasn't Mickey on. That wasn't it. You said that wasn't actually Mickey on.
Yeah, it wasn't Steve. Is the point.
On the loop records in Mickey's.
No, I'm saying no. That's true what I said, but what I'm saying is that I'm not having a go at Mickey.
Yeah.
I'm basically saying that's losing Steve was a loss musically, and if it had been Mickey, or if it was a Sesame Mission or whatever, and promise you it was. Have you ever heard Mickey sing?
Yes, he can hold a note and that. He's got you can. There's TV footage and that.
God,
He sort of sings with a sort of.
David.
He sort of sang with sort of a slight hint of a Welsh accent almost.
From South London, yeah. A name like Finn, very Welsh.
Yeah, on the
ideal sex sort of symbol. They just stunning, and they worked terribly well together. After weeks of, shall I take him on? Shall I not? Shall I take him on? Shall I not? Oh, I don't know, Jim. I said, well, try. Do it for 2 weeks. If it doesn't work, we'll find somebody else.
Right, well, I think we've got enough because
okay.
to nibble out some bits.
You have a real time editing that, mate.
Oh, I don't edit it. My husband's editing it.
He's going to kill you.
Yeah, he's
well,
going to...
perhaps not you.
No, he's not going to kill me, is he?
Okay.
Right. Okay, thanks.